Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on January 21st from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Today we have a special show featuring music and news as well as arts events in our community. Later on in the show, we're going to hear from May Pang, the lost weekend girlfriend of John Lennon. She'll be exhibiting her photos of John in Ybor City starting this Friday at Tempus Projects. We'll hear more about that later in the show. But first up this hour, we're going to talk about some music-related happenings in Sarasota's Selby Gardens. Our guests are Jennifer Romanecki, the president and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Dr. David Barry, their chief museum curator. Welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer and David.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
I'm really glad you could join us. Thanks so much. So before we tell the music fans here in our audience about the special exhibits and performances that are coming up at Selby, let's just go get a little bit of background. How would you describe Selby Gardens to somebody who hasn't visited yet?
Well, Selby Gardens consists of, it's one organization with two campuses, the downtown Sarasota campus and the historic Spanish Point campus 10 miles south. And basically, we provide incredible bayfront sanctuaries that connect people to air plants of the world, native nature, and our regional history. So we're lucky to steward 45 bayfront acres in the heart of Sarasota.
And one of those campuses is right in the city, right in downtown Sarasota.
That's right. So our downtown Sarasota campus is right in the heart of the city, yet it really is an urban oasis and provides respite and refuge and an escape for all, for sure.
And Jennifer, you mentioned something about air plants. So what is Selby's claim to fame? I guess it would be when it comes to things like bromeliads, and describe that for people who don't know what that is.
Yeah, so Selby Gardens is the only botanical garden in the world that focuses on the study of epiphytes, or air plants that grow in the tree canopy instead of the soil, like orchids and bromeliads. We are actually world-renowned for having the best scientifically documented collections of orchids and bromeliads anywhere. So that really is our claim to fame and what we are known internationally for.
And one more thing I want to get to before we get to the music section of the interview is that in reading about Selby Gardens, I read that it was established by forward-thinking women of their time. What do you mean by that?
Great question. So we have iconic women in the history of Selby Gardens. So we have Marie Selby at the downtown Sarasota campus, and it was actually her fateful decision to leave the campus to be a botanical garden for the public to enjoy as a bequest in 1971. And her husband's wealth came from the oil industry, but her husband passed away much earlier than she did, and it was her decision to found this botanical garden. At the historic Spanish Point campus, the property is the former home of Bertha Palmer, who, is certainly iconic in our region for not only sort of making our region what it is from a real estate standpoint, but also for being a groundbreaking woman in cattle ranching, in art collecting, all kinds of leadership Bertha Palmer has shown. So it's wonderful to have these two iconic women as the background of the founding of both campuses.
So keeping with the music theme of today's show, and more specifically the Beatles, you have an exhibition that opens on February 9th. It's called George Harrison, A Gardener's Life. It's part of a series that examines the work of major artists through the lens of their connection to nature. So what was George Harrison's connection to nature?
Well, that's a great question. So basically, with this series, we've been trying to look at major artists, as you said, through the lens of their connection to nature, but really trying to uncover surprising connections. And of course, many people know George Harrison as the lead guitarist of the Beatles, of course, iconic rock band. But many people don't realize that at the age of 27, when the Beatles broke up, George Harrison purchased a derelict Victorian estate outside of London, 32 acres of it, and then spent the whole rest of his life personally gardening it, restoring it, and also recording his solo music career with a recording studio on the property. So this is really a surprising story for many people. And, you know, George Harrison was often quoted as saying, "I'm just a gardener," after the Beatles. And his autobiography, I Mean Mine, he dedicated to gardeners everywhere. David, would you like to chime in further on that?
Jennifer, I think you covered the basics. One of the things that our show will do is not only look at George and his revitalization of the property, but the history of the property itself, which goes back to the end of the 19th century and involves a rather colorful character by the name of Frank Crisp. And I think George saw a kind of kinship with Crisp. And ultimately, Crisp is the source of inspiration for Let It Roll, or the Ballad of Frankie Crisp, which is one of the great songs from All Things Must Pass.
And one specific thing about the way that George gardened, I guess, according to what I've been reading, is that he had a dedication to humor in gardening and spontaneity and whimsy. Tell us more about that and how that plays into the exhibition at Selby.
It's definitely part of George's contribution, and I think it was an extension of his sort of playful character. But I think that's another area of overlap where he sees a connection with Crisp. Frank Crisp was a very prominent lawyer in Victorian Britain, very successful. He dabbled in a number of different scientific disciplines. He was a great collector of microscopes and had an interest in microscopy, was also involved in horticulture. He was briefly president of the Royal Horticultural Society, but he had a great sense of humor. And one of his many horticultural interests was gardening and really garden history. So he produces a history of medieval gardens, and when he lays out Friar Park, which is the estate that ultimately George purchases and brings back to life, he does so by populating the grounds with different garden types that have a history going back to the Middle Ages. And to give you an example, one of the things we're featuring in the show is a map that Crisp commissions, a plan of the gardens from 1914. He commissions an illustrator named Alan Tabor, and the map is annotated, all the little fun features. It's sort of like a Where's Waldo-like situation, where you have little garden critters roaming around in the woods, and everything is named ye this or ye that. He's definitely playing up on the kind of medieval history, but they're really fun and humorous turns of phrase. And George, I think, taps into that. He references whole sections of the map in some of his songs. Some of the lyrics, for example, in Let It Roll, are taken directly from descriptors on the plan. So I think there's a kinship there. But one of the great things with George and Olivia Harrison's contributions to the history of this estate was they didn't limit themselves to faithful historical reconstruction. They were very, very mindful of and sympathetic to the history, and really celebrated that history and cherished that history, but they did it in their own way, which I think is spot on, because I think had the roles been reversed, I think that's probably how Crisp would have done it as well.
Our guests are David Barry, the Chief Museum Curator at Mary Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Jennifer Romanecki, the President and CEO of Selby Gardens. And we're talking about exhibitions there that are relating to music. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from WMNF. So you were referring to the kind of the original designs of Friar Park, this estate that George Harrison bought after he left the Beatles, after the Beatles disbanded, and how it was set up when it was first created. But then when George got it, it was kind of in disrepair, and he had to go through and re-garden everything, it seems. Was he faithful to the original designs, or did he put his own little spin on it?
He builds on the existing blueprint, I guess would be the way to describe it. There are some major garden features that are quite sizable, because the property that George purchases is about 32 acres. And to give you an example, Crisp built in the 1890s this extraordinary alpine garden, and the garden itself is 4 acres. And at the top of it is a kind of a scale model of the Matterhorn in the Alps. And it's this extraordinary, almost earthwork that was populated with all these different plants. So certainly that was still standing, and it was something that George had to reckon with as a physical feature of the property. He, I think, was very interested in the history and in kind of rediscovering what had been created there. But when it came to the replanting of that garden, it wasn't necessarily, he wasn't limiting himself to just the plants that Crisp had used. There's a reflection of George and Olivia's tastes, and just, I think, general changes in gardening fashion. But it's working with the bones, with the framework that was there, and being deeply, deeply respectful of that. And you see it there's a topiary garden, the cultivation of a lake that's sort of at the bottom of the property. All the major elements that Crisp lays out that are the kind of defining points of the property have been preserved and have been greatly loved and cared for. But the plantings are all a little bit different, reflecting the tastes of the gardeners and the changing of the times.
So if people go to Selby Garden beginning February 9th and see this George Harrison, A Gardener's Life exhibition, how do you translate what you've been telling us about George's love of gardening? What will that look like at Selby Gardens?
Jennifer, you want to take that?
Sure. So really what we have pioneered here at Selby Gardens is a truly interdisciplinary experience. So these exhibits that we feature at this time of the year incorporate art, imagery, ephemera, as well as horticultural installation, music. We really want you to use all of your senses. So when visitors arrive at Selby Gardens, they will encounter a number of garden vignettes that connect to George Harrison's vision for Friar Park and evoke different elements of Friar Park and George himself, as well as his music. So there will be different horticultural experiences in the gardens as well as inside the conservatory. And then different albums from George Harrison's really iconic solo career will punctuate different elements of the garden's experience. The visitor will hear All Things Must Pass, A Living in the Material World, Dark Horse. So it'll be a very much interdisciplinary experience between immersing in the horticultural garden vignettes, hearing the music, and then also being able to encounter excerpts of Olivia Harrison's poetry with her book, Came the Lightning, of 20 poems she dedicated to George Harrison on the anniversary of his passing. So it's a very cross-discipline experience. And then finally, you'll arrive at the museum building where you will not only encounter images of George Harrison in his gardens that really have never been seen by the public before, whether it's him actually at the beginning, in the estate when it's not in good shape and when he's embarking on fixing it, to the way the gardens look now, as well as to historic imagery and rare books and material connecting to the iconic Friar Park of the Victorian era. So we thought it was a wonderful coincidence that we had some of this rare books material in our own collection, because Selby Gardens has rare books and prints dating to the 1600s in our library. And so we were really excited to find some synergies with our own collection. So it really will be an exhibit of multiple disciplines using all of your senses. And at the same time, it's an exhibit about discovery, because most people don't know this side of George Harrison. And so I think it'll be very engaging, fun, and also educational for sure.
And speaking of Olivia Harrison, she'll actually be there giving a lecture, one luncheon on February 11th. Now, you can't mention any prices, but what will Olivia Harrison speak about then?
So this is great. We have been collaborating with Olivia Harrison and the estate on this project. And so she is coming in to really be our keynote lecturer in conversation with Robin Lane Fox, a world-renowned gardener, historian, and scholar. And basically, it's a great way to kick off the exhibit. Not sure how many tickets are left, but if you go to selby.org, there might be a few left, although it's selling out quickly. And I think, she will share her perspective, not only on George and Friar Park, but also what went into her writing her poems dedicated to George. In this book, Came the Lightning, and she will also sign copies of her book at the event. And then the next day on February 12th, we will have an evening dedicated to George Harrison with Patti Smith, Selby Gardens' iconic artist in residence, who will be doing a 1-hour performance connecting to George Harrison through her own lens. And so it's a real double whammy to launch the exhibit, and we're really excited about the momentum and energy that will bring to the first week of the exhibit.
And on the subject of Patti Smith, her exhibit is still on display through August 31st. It's called Patti Smith, A Book of Days, and that's at the historic Spanish Point campus. What can people see there?
So this is so Patti Smith, we've been collaborating with for several years now, and it's really an incredible partnership that we have. And so on view at the historic Spanish Point campus are photographs that Patti Smith took herself that are featured in her book, A Book of Days, which is based on her Instagram account. It's sort of, the book is a slice of her life on and off the road. And throughout her life, she has really been influenced by nature. And so the exhibit really highlights photographs she took herself that resonate within nature, which is one of her key inspirations. And it's great to see her photographs outdoors set in the natural landscape. So they're blown up on aluminum and sited in the natural landscape, which makes for a really interesting and dynamic presentation of her works.
What's the history of the connection of Patti Smith to Selby Gardens, and why do you think that it's been a good match?
Well, our relationship with Patti started with this interdisciplinary exhibition series when we featured her in dialogue with Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs of flowers. And we did that exhibit in 2022. And it was, again, along the same vein as this George Harrison exhibit, multidisciplinary, featuring music, lyrics, poetry, and then, of course, Robert's photography, because the two of them really have a very storied relationship that was featured in her book, Just Kids. And so that exhibit, I thought, well, let's see if we can get Patti Smith here. And, we connected with her, invited her to perform, and, we just hit it off. So I thought, well, let me ask her to be our artist in residence. She can just say no if she doesn't want to do it. And she said yes. And so coming up, the evening dedicated to George Harrison will be Patti Smith's sixth performance at Selby Gardens since 2022. And we look forward to cooking up more projects together going forward. And it's just been an incredible relationship. And at the same time, I think it underscores that botanical gardens, yes, they are about nature, science, plants, green space, but they can also be places where art is performed, art is created, and art is exhibited. And so I think that, we have built upon that with having Patti Smith as our artist in residence.
And we will put information about all of those exhibits on our website, WMNF.org. And in the last couple of minutes that we have, I'm going to ask you to describe some of the sustainability measures that you're taking at Selby. Tell us about that.
Sure. So in January 2024, Selby Gardens opened the first phase of our three-phase master plan. And basically, we are now the world's first net positive energy botanical garden complex, meaning that we generate more energy than we consume. And that's due to more than 50,000 square feet of solar that allows us to be powered by the sun. And so the first phase feature that is now open features a new welcome center with a welcome gallery and welcome theater that also has an orientation video narrated by none other than Patti Smith. We also have a new plant research center where all of our preserved collections are safeguarded and where all of our research activities take place. And then we have what we're calling our Living Energy Access Facility, or the LEAF. Yes, it houses parking. It also has a one-story garden-to-plate restaurant with an edible garden that fuels the produce served in the restaurant, a new gift shop, but then the kicker is that there's a more than 50,000 square foot solar array on the roof that is powering the whole project and makes us the first net positive energy botanical garden complex. So all of that is open, and we're now embarking on plans for phase 2, which will break ground at the end of this year and open by the end of 2027. The second phase involves a glass house complex for our living collections that is resilient and also powered with 100% renewable energy. So today, when you come to Selby Gardens, you can see less than 5% of our collections in our conservatory. This will bring out almost 100% of our living collections to the public. And then adjacent to that will be an indoor-outdoor learning pavilion for all of our education programs, as well as new garden features.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming on Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer and David.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and we'll look forward to seeing you and all your listeners in the gardens, I hope.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks so much. Jennifer Romanecki is the president and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Dr. David Barry is their chief museum curator. And we turn now to our other musically related topic today. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. There's an exhibition of photos opening Friday, January 24th at Tempus Projects in Ybor City, Tampa, The Lost Weekend. The photography of May Pang. May documented her life with John Lennon from 1973 through 1975. And I'd like to welcome May Pang to Tuesday Cafe. Welcome, May.
Thank you, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to talk specifically about your photos and about your exhibition throughout the interview, but let's set all of that up with some background information about you. Tell us about your life before you met John Lennon.
Wow. I had been working for him for him and Yoko actually for 3 years prior to my relationship with him. And I worked in the office of Apple Records and APCO, which was the managing company of Apple in New York and in the U.S. And so I got a chance to work with a bunch of people and work in the music industry.
And one of the people that you were working with before you even worked with John and Yoko directly was Alan Klein. What kinds of things were you doing with Alan Klein, who was managing John Lennon?
Well, I was working for their publishing, doing more publishing than anything else. I mean, I was working around the place as a secretary, and in case they needed me at another spot, I would be there to fill in. But I mainly worked in music publishing, which was a treat for me because he had the greatest catalog, as I would say, and to learn from. I mean, you're talking about Cameo Parkway Records and Publishing, which was, of course, back in the day, that was a big company with all the Philly sound, Dee Dee Sharp, Bobby Rydell, and, Question Mark and the Mysterians. And then he also at that time was managing the Stones. So he also had Immediate Records and Publishing. So I had the Stones Publishing, and he had CAG's catalog, which was Sam Cooke. And that was another thrill. So besides Apple, he had all this other stuff. To me, that was a treasure trove of info and fun and going through the music. And that I was into.
And I'm going to flash forward a little bit to when you were a personal assistant for John and Yoko, and you went to England and you were at their estate when you first heard the song Imagine. So describe what was happening when you first heard that song and what it was like.
It was amazing to be standing there. And, you hear records, you say, oh, I love the song, and you just move on. But to see them, as he was performing it in a sense, even though it was done to be filmed, and you have to give them credit. All the Beatles did something that was ahead of their time. You think about it, they were filming vignettes for each of their songs, individual songs on their album. So I was there when they did the whole Imagine album, but this specifically for Imagine, I was there, and I remember him sitting at the piano and Yoko opening up the shutters in the big room, and I was helping her get dressed for each vignette they were doing and different things. So it really affected me. You start seeing it, so it's not just so easy. It's everything is thought out. So it was great.
And by 1973, everyone was in New York. You and John and Yoko were in New York, but then John suggested leaving New York and going to L.A., and he brought you, but this wasn't at the insistence of Yoko? Is that how history somehow gets it wrong?
History is, as I would always say, that's why I ended up doing the documentary, The Lost Weekend, A Love Story, only because I had to take back my narrative. It just everybody else was doing my narrative, and they were saying whatever they wanted and what they thought was actually happening. But what actually happened was John was having a moment where he was with his lawyer, who happened to live in L.A. Harold Sider was getting ready, and he looked at John and he says, "Okay, we're done." And John said, "Well, when are you going back to L.A.?" And he said, "Tonight. I'm on a plane tonight, like 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, whatever it was." And he goes, "Well," he looked at him and he goes, "Well, May and I will be joining you." And he went, "Oh, okay." Wow. And so there I was standing there going, we're leaving, we're going somewhere. And I had to get everything and arrange for, us to be on the same flight as Harold. And so, yes, it was John's suggestion. He just wanted to get out of Dodge, as I would say.
Our guest is May Pang. She has an exhibition of photos opening Friday, January 24th at Tempus Projects in Ybor City. It's called The Lost Weekend, The Photography of May Pang. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Kinane, and we're broadcasting from WMNF in Tampa. So once you got to L.A., John was working on an album of cover songs, and the album was called Rock and Roll. It was being produced by Phil Spector. So tell us what those sessions were like.
Crazy. That's all I'm going to say. Was not, and I was not used to it because we had been doing other albums and stuff in New York, and so this was the first time. You're working with Phil Spector, perfect person for cover songs from back in the '60s. That John wanted to pay homage to all the people that represented his life. The songs he loved, and so perfect person. So we thought. Until I realized that this man was carrying his guns. And John and I really thought that when he was carrying his guns that they were not real, that they were filled with blanks. And he was just showing, I'm Phil Spector and here are my guns, and who would have thought in a million years that they were loaded? Until he shot it off one day when we happened to be in LA and we were listening to something, and I was in one room, and John and Phil and Mal Evans, the original roadie for the Beatles, were in another room. And all of a sudden we heard this noise, and everybody that was in the room that I was standing in, the control room, ducked. And I'm standing there going, what is that sound? Everybody else is ducking except me. And I'm standing next to, of all people, Phil's mother, who happened to come by the studio. And I went running towards the sound, and I opened the door, and there's Phil with the gun in his hand. And John has his finger in his ear because the pop was so loud it was affecting his eardrum. And he's saying, Phil, if you're going to shoot me, but don't mess with my ears, man. I got to listen. I got to use them. And Mal goes over to Phil and says, give me that. You shouldn't have this in your hand. And Phil's going, you can't tell me what to do. And I'm going, hey guys, come on, what's going on? Here's the youngest person. I am the youngest person in this group, but seem to be the oldest person in this group. And I'm going, what is going on? And Mal says, we're just horsing around, and he was doing something. Phil was doing something that was hurting Mal, and Mal, just as he was back then, gentle giant, said, can you not do that? It really hurts, that you're hurting my nose, and I could feel it. And Phil didn't take to it too well. And that's when he went and he drew the gun out, and it went off. Well, lo and behold, everybody calmed down. We all went back to the recording. The next day, John and I are having a peaceful dinner, so we thought. And I see Mal. I said, Mal's in the restaurant. He goes, Mal, And he comes running. He goes, oh, I've been looking for you two. And he said, what's going on? He goes, well, just wanted to show you the bullet from last night. And both John and I were like stunned. What bullet? That's how it was. What bullet are you talking about? He goes, there were real bullets? We were just so totally taken aback by that one.
And there was something that set John off around this time when you were recording Rock and Roll, when Phil Spector was there. Didn't John go off into a rage and even physically abuse you at some point around this time?
Now his story has gotten more out of hand than anything. When we were in the recording session, the first thing I noticed was there were bottles of liquor. And I said to John, I've never seen this before. And obviously Phil had ordered all of this stuff. So everybody was drinking. And so what happened was John hanging out with the boys, and all the boys, and I say that, wanted to go party. Me being the only one not drinking, a lot of them didn't take too kindly to that one. Not Phil, not anybody. So John thought he was just one of the boys. And the abuse was really more like he just shoved me to the side, but it wasn't like he was really going at it. He didn't even realize. And I mean, John was he was just like, what happened? He didn't even realize what had happened. So John was just wanting to be one of the guys. But what people fail to understand, he did not do this and say, oh, I'm going to go and continue on. And, it was instigated by so many of them, including Phil. I mean, he was a big instigator for those sessions, that he would come in late, we'd be waiting, and everybody was already getting drunk because all the liquor is sitting out there for the boys to enjoy, and I was not happy about it at all, and that's what happened. And I said to John at one point, somebody's going to hurt somebody soon. And I was talking about people who were leaving drunk and driving. And that's what scared me. And it did happen. Somebody did have a crash.
And around this time, you decided to go back to New York. Why was that?
Well, that was later. I mean, all that started early, and then this came later. It was just a little too much, and it was time. I said, I got to go. I can't deal with this. And, my girlfriend was actually with me, and apparently John actually told her, he says, just take care of May. Just make sure she's okay. So, you know what? It obviously wasn't the last time I saw him, and everything straightened out. I went home, and next thing you know, I'm back out there. It was like not even, not very long. It was like turnaround.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons that you went back to LA once you were in New York is because Cynthia Lennon and Julian, John's first son, they were about to visit John. Yeah, they were about to visit John. And who was it that suggested to you that you should go back out to LA and kind of help make that peaceful?
Well, it was actually John. There's a lot more to the story. I could only tell so much. There's a lot of things in there. And even when I wrote about it, I try to make it as simple as possible. It's never that easy. But it was John who didn't even want me to leave. He said, and he turned around and he said to Yoko, I really rather have May come back, try and find her, and see where she is, and and whatever. And I didn't even want to go back. When she found out I was in New York, she says, where are you? I said, I'm in New York. She goes, come right over. She goes, John can't be by himself. I said, what are you talking about? She says, he's got to have somebody there, and you got to go back. And I said, I don't think it's a good idea at first. And he goes, no, you got to go. He can't be alone. And it was just, it was one of those moments. And I got back on a plane. It was like I was home more than 24 hours, and I was back on a plane. And I went out there, and he said, he said to me, he says, I knew I could get you back out here. I was trying to find a way. And this is, I'm sorry you left, and sorry, it was all this other stuff that went on.
But the visit then with Cynthia, Julian, and John went well, and in part because of, how you kind of lubricated the whole thing.
Absolutely. What an interesting word, lubricated. That's it for this. Yeah, you know what? He was so nervous because he hadn't seen Cynthia in years. Not since their divorce, I think. And he hadn't spoken to her or anything. And he hadn't seen Julian in 3 years, because I was around when that was one of the last times they were together. And I will tell you that I told him, I said, I will make it easy and it'll be fine. And I gave them the opening to have that closure that they needed. And it worked, because after that, it was much easier for them to communicate when he had to speak to Julian, which I made sure that he called every weekend.
Our guest is May Pang. She has an exhibition of photos opening Friday, January 24th at Tempus Projects in Ybor City, Tampa. It's called The Lost Weekend, the photography of May Pang. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from WMNF in Tampa. So back in LA, you were there when John was producing an LP with Harry Nilsson, and he wanted everyone to live together. So tell us about where everyone lived and who was there.
Well, to live together was a whole interesting thing, because, John always thought, well, if we get everybody together, then, nobody will. One of the things that John took for serious was always the recording. And he loved for everybody to be and get there on time. So he thought, instead of everybody wandering off, maybe we'd get everybody in, get everybody out there, and we'll be fine. Well, little did I know that Harry actually Harry was the one who rented this place, and he told John, and it turned out to be the house that was built by Louis B. Mayer, of course, one of those movie moguls of the 1920s or whatever, and he built that. But it was once owned by the Peter Lawford, who was the in-law to the Kennedys. And of course, this has the history of where Marilyn might have been there as well. Those are the rumors. And John was fascinated by it. And because I remember when we got into the house, I said, "Oh, we're on the beach. We're in Santa Monica." And he opens up the balcony. There's like a Juliet balcony. And he goes, "So this is where they did it." And the view was beautiful. Look out into the ocean. And I said, "Did what?" And he goes, "Marilyn, Marilyn." I said, "What?" And then I realized that here we are, this was the house. And then a few days later, after we moved in, there was a party that Peter Lawford was throwing. And we went to it, and I sat next to him, and I said, "Hey, Peter, I just want to tell you something." He goes, "What?" And I go, "We just moved into this house on Pacific Coast Highway." And I tell him, and he goes, and he had his cigarette in his between his fingers, and he took a puff, and he blew it out, and he goes, and a smile came on his face, and he goes, "Some good times, some really good times." You can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is the things that happened,
And
it was amazing.
You were taking photographs this whole time, and that's part of what this exhibition is about. But the good times in the past isn't just what you're concerned about. There were musical rendezvous happening there at the beach when you were there and when John Lennon was there. Who else came during those recording sessions? Who else jammed?
Well, I think the first night is what we're all alluding to, and that was the first night of the session. And it was this guy named Paul McCartney with his lovely wife, Linda. And it was at the end of the session. And I remember Paul walking through the doors, and I'm facing John, and he sort of read my mouth as I'm going, "Paul?" And he goes, "Paul." And he turned and he saw him and he went, "Oh, hey, hi." And it was nothing. No fanfare, no nothing. They just said hi. And he goes, "What? Are you finished?" And John said, "Yeah, but if you want to hang around, we've got other things going, we'll probably hang and do some music." He goes, "Yeah." And then, of course, Stevie Wonder shows up as well. And so that night we did a jam session, and both Mal Evans and myself ended up playing tambourines as Linda's on Hammond organ, Stevie Wonder on electric piano. But we didn't have a drummer. Now, for the session, we actually had 3 drummers. We had Ringo, we had Jim Keltner, and we had Keith Moon. But they all left after the session ended, so we didn't have a drummer. So the bass player in the group decides to be the drummer. Now we don't have a bass player. So to this day, I don't know who joined us on that one.
Our guest is May Pang. She has an exhibition of photos opening Friday, January 24th at Tempus Projects in Ybor City. It's called The Lost Weekend, the photography of May Pang. And we're talking about the experiences and the photography during that lost weekend with John Lennon. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from WMNF in Tampa. So you and John eventually went back to New York, and he got sober. Is that right?
Well, you know what? He was never drinking as everybody. The couple of times that we were hanging out in LA, he was not drinking all the time. It just happens that when you go out and there's a lot of things going on, you hang out with your buddies, the person that gets noticed is the person that's going to make the best copy. And even though Harry Nilsson started the night out, no one's going to care about Harry Nilsson in the copy as much as they would like to see John Lennon. So that's what ended up happening. But we were not out every night drinking. And so it was, it was one of those things.
Around that time is when John was recording the Walls and Bridges LP. One of the songs on that is Number 9 Dream. You were a background vocalist on that song.
Yeah, I had no idea I was going to be the background vocalist or the vocalist to that little segment, because all of a sudden I'm in the other room working on some accounts and things, and I hear the assistant coming running to me saying, "Oh, we need you immediately. John needs you." I said, "For what?" And I go running in, and I see the room is dark in the studio. Lights on the microphones hanging, and then all of a sudden it was like I look at John. I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Get out there." And I said, "Get out where?" And I see this, and I go, "Why am I going out there?" He goes, "I need you out there. Just go out." And him and his engineer, Roy Sicalo, were just laughing. I said, "What is going on?" He goes, "Go out there, I need you." And that's how it started for me to end up doing the whispering of John's name out there on Number 9 Dream.
Another song that was on that LP is Whatever Gets You Through the Night. So what's the connection with Elton John there, and what's the significance of that song for John Lennon?
Well, I think that night, we were working on the remix and overdubs and we found out that Elton was in town. He wanted to come by and visit. And he said, what can I'd love to come by. And John said, sure. And what he was working on, he said to Elton, I'm working on this. And he goes, I'm thinking of something. He goes, well, Elton says, hang on, let me hear it. And then he goes, all right, I got an idea. And that was all. And he went by the piano and he goes and started putting down the track for it. And it was great. All he had to do was hear it once and he was gone. He was doing it. And
Elton knew it was a number one hit?
Well, you know what? When it came to picking the song, there was a couple of songs that Capitol wanted, and one of them happened to be Whatever Gets You Through the Night. And, a few of us thought, oh, that could be a hit. He goes, then John goes, I'm not sure. And he was mentioning it to them, and he said, listen, he goes, if it becomes a hit and becomes number one, then you'll have to get on stage with me. And John said, oh, sure, I'll do it. And the only reason he accepted that was because he didn't think it was going to become number one. And John had never had a number one at that point. So, and when it happened, it was like, oh my God. And Elton, being gracious, said, listen, you don't have to get up on stage if you don't want to. And John said, no, a bet is a bet, and I'm gonna honor it.
And that turned out to be the Madison Square Garden concert where Elton John was performing and John Lennon came up and did that song. I don't know if you want to add anything more about the personal side of things that happened that night or that started from that night.
Well, there was nothing more than that. Everybody kept wanting to know what happened. I mean, we only had one rehearsal. John and I flew up with Elton on his private plane to Boston to see him perform just so he could understand the show. And I think if you're alluding to is the fact that, yes, Yoko came to the show, but I was the one who told her that that John was going to be there to perform. And she said, oh my God, I want to go. And tickets were arranged by Tony King, who worked for Apple at the time and who was a good friend of Elton's. And we said, make sure she gets her ticket. So she goes, absolutely. And so that was it. They saw each other backstage. We knew she was going to be there. And that was it. Then we all went to the after party, and John and I went home. And then we had things to do because we knew that, with the storyline that's going on, people forget. George Harrison came to town. We went to see George, and Julian was coming back for his Christmas holiday. So we went to Florida. And then, of course, the signing of the breakup of the Beatles. That all still happened after the Elton John concert. So let's put the myth down that was a myth. They did not get back together. That was all a myth.
Yeah, and speaking of Julian's trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando, you were there, and the breakup of the Beatles. John had missed the signing I think it was in New York. Everyone was wondering where John was.
That was during that time, yeah.
Yeah, but then those documents were signed when all of you were in Orlando at Walt Disney World, and you documented that with your camera.
Yeah, what happened was John didn't sign it on the date they had. It was the day before George's last date of his concert. And there was still something that was irking John because he would have been involved with taxes for the breakup, and he didn't want to be the only one. Let's put it that way, because he was the only one that was living in America. There was 35 to 40 people in the room at each time they had a meeting. So to get everything done, and he finally expressed his concern. He goes, I just don't want to be the only one to be responsible for this. So, he didn't want to come in, and he told the lawyer, his own lawyer had no idea. And I got on the phone. I said, Harold, he's not coming. And I told him the reason. So he said, okay. And he just went in and he said, the stars aren't right, just for that. And so it never, he didn't appear. But a couple of days later, it was all worked out. But by that point, we were now getting ready we're down in Florida. So they had to bring down all the paperwork. Everything was done. And the paperwork was brought down to the Polynesian Resort Hotel in Disney World for John to sign. And everybody to this day has been looking for that room. And the room that I was told that, they think they had it. I said, you got to be kidding. We'll never be on the ground floor. So that was it. And they're still looking for it. And besides, I know that the place had been renovated. So definitely not there.
Well, that's one of your famous photos when you took a photo of John signing the breakup documents for the Beatles at Walt Disney World. But another photo that you took is of Julian Lennon that he's using as the cover of his latest album called Jude. What are some of the other types of photos that people might see when they go to this exhibition? Well,
not only did I get Julian's cover, which was great, but I had the father doing on the 45 sleeve for the UK when they released Imagine, and he himself picked out, each of them picked out their photos. He wanted that photo for the sleeve, and I only found out most recently that release was also for Imagine on the UK was done on my birthday back in 1975. So I was even thrilled about that.
Well, is there anything else that people should know about your story or about your photographic arts before I let you go, May?
Well, you know what? When they come out to Tampa, I will be there. Whatever the hours are, I will be there. And it will be, they can come and talk to me, and they can now see the photos of John the way I saw him, the way I took. I didn't take it all the time because I felt, it had to be special the way. There were times when I looked at it and said, oh, this is a great shot. But this was only for us. So to me, this was, I'm glad I can share it with other people so they can see what he looked like really during our time together. And I also found out that the gallery, it's a nonprofit place too. So, please come in and hopefully you'll pick up a piece and, take John home, as I would say. I can now share him with everyone.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on Tuesday Cafe, May.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
May Pang is exhibiting her photos opening Friday, January 24th at Tempus Projects in Ybor City. The exhibition is called The Lost Weekend, The Photography of May Pang. It runs through Sunday, January 26th. Tempus Projects is at 1624 East 7th Avenue on the second floor in Tampa's Ybor City. You can also see her photo exhibition at the Ocean Art Gallery in Ormond Beach on Tuesday, January 21st and the 22nd. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. A film about May Pang and John Lennon is called The Lost Weekend, a love story. This has been WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and if you missed any of this show, or if you'd like to share it with a friend, you can watch it on WMNF.org. I just published it a few seconds ago, so you can share that interview or watch it again. Next week, we have a special guest host. Gary Gibbons will host Tuesday Cafe. And in this time slot tomorrow is Midpoint. Pat Kemp will guest host for Shelley. Coming up next is an episode of Alternative Radio, and it's all about union power, and it features Sarah Nelson, so I hope you stay tuned for that after NPR News headlines. Then coming up at noon is Wide Awake America with Nadine Smith. Today, she talks with Eric Deggans. He's NPR's first full-time TV critic and the author of the book Race Baiter, How the Media Wields Dangerous Words to Divide a Nation. They explore the critical role of journalism in democracy, the impact of the new administration's threats to crack down on the press, and how those challenges could reshape public trust and accountability in the years to come. This has been Tuesday Cafe. We're coming to you live on January 21st, 2025 from the studios of WMNF, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, and Lakeland. Thanks so much for listening to WMNF Community Radio and supporting community radio. Hey, we have a fund drive coming up in about a month, so if you would like to support programs like this, please make a donation at WMNF Thanks so much for your support, and hey, see you at the Tempus Projects this weekend. WMNF Tampa.